Thank you, Pat. Good evening. Before I begin my presentation, I will share with you an experience about my quest for information about American carriage clocks. My primary clock collection is French carriage clocks, but a few years ago I bought my first Boston carriage clock, and to my surprise, I discovered that while the case and the movement were simple, it was very well made and equal to or better than most time-only French carriage clocks of the time. I also found that very little research existed about Joseph Henry Eastman and the 7 clock companies with 9 different company names, of which he was a founder or principal. The best published research done to date was an article in the June 1986 Bulletin by Harold Cherry. At the end of his article, he challenged someone to pick up the quest to learn and publish more about Joseph Eastman. This presentation is an outline of my article, a biography about Eastman titled Joseph Henry Eastman, the Watchmaker, the Clockmaker, the Man, which was published in the NAWCC Bulletin number 406, November-December issue 2013. Also, I found at the end of the article is a timeline of his companies which I created from my research. This is the second part of the presentation I gave at the October 2013 Ward Franchon Time Symposium. And now, the many clock companies of Joseph Henry Eastman. He was born in Georgetown, Massachusetts on September the 10th, 1843. The 1850 census shows his father as a shoemaker. In the 1860 census, Joseph Eastman is listed as a shoemaker, probably an apprentice, in Newton, New Hampshire. He was then 16 years old. In the 1870 census, he's found working as a watchmaker, probably an apprentice. In the 1880 Boston City Directory, he's listed as a watchmaker in business for himself. It has been reported that his early clockmaking training was under the tutelage of Edward Howard. Charles Alex's book, Carriage Clocks, Their History and Development, states that he was apprenticed to E. Howard Watch Company. However, the E. Howard Watch Company did not exist until 1903, but possibly he did work for Howard Watch and Clock Company, which was in existence from 1863 to 1881. It is uncertain if these reports are true, as the records of his early life are sketchy at best. So let's look at the facts we do know about him. We will look at the many clock companies he served as a founder or principal, and also his relationship to the Chelsea Clock Company. Joseph Eastman, Samuel S. Campbell, Charles M. Campbell, and James H. Gary joined together to form the Harvard Clock Company on November the 20th, 1880. It was located at 147 Columbus Avenue in Chelsea, Massachusetts. This was Eastman's first venture into clock manufacturing. It is estimated that the Harvard Clock Company made about 800 clocks before changing the name of the company to the Boston Clock Company. This was by act of the Massachusetts legislature on May 29, 1884. And there are only rumors as to why after only 3.5 years, the name was changed. Only about 100 of the clocks made during the Harvard Clock Company period were carriage clocks. All were high-quality 11-jewel movements. Harvard Clock Company also made other clocks and timing devices for bank vault clocks. Only about 8 of these Harvard carriage clocks are known to exist today. So if you have one, please register it with the Chelsea Clock Museum Harvard Registry online. After the name was changed to the Boston Clock Company, the factory remained at the same address, 147 Columbus Street, Boston. Carriage clocks made by the Boston Clock Company were the second most popular style of clocks produced in Joseph Eastman's numerous tries at clock manufacturing. The 5 carriage clock models produced by the Boston Clock Company are named Athens, Delos, Sparta, Queen Anne, and Cyprus. Also, there are many variations of each of these models, such as some have chapter rings with gilt masks, some have full porcelain faces. Some of the Cyprus and Delos cases were made in France, as they have a top window and metric screws. The same models have cases made in the USA, which have no top window. The best estimate is that between 1884 and 1894, the company produced a total of about 4,700 carriage clocks, not including the Cyprus model. Boston Clock Company serial numbered the movements consecutively, not the cases. So we don't know exactly how many of each model was produced. The latest serial numbers found was 4657 on a Queen Anne and a Delos model 4843. The first serial number was probably number 1001 or 1201. The production records no longer exist. Boston carriage clock movements are all the same except for Cyprus. All models have 8-day time-only movements with 7 jewels and a vertically mounted lever escapement similar to the Waltham Watch Company escapement. Cyprus, due to its unique movement, was given a separate set of serial numbers. About 600 of this model was produced. Some models have cases made in the USA that have no top window and the same ribbed handle found on many of the other Boston models. Other models have a French imported case with a top window, metric screws, and an octagon sectional handle similar to those found on some French production carriage clocks of the time. Some of the Cyprus cases have the Damascene backplate, while others are pictured, as in this slide, with a sculpted backplate. The Cyprus case is larger than any of the other time-only carriage clocks, and this is to accommodate the large tandem wind movement. Cyprus is the only model carriage clock made by Boston Clock Company to have the tandem wind feature, which allows the time and strike spring barrels to be wound on a single winding square. This model has an hour and half-hour strike on a gong. A 7-jewel movement was standard on the Cyprus model. However, a higher quality 11-jewel movement with a nickeled Damascene backplate was offered as an option. All 5 Boston carriage clock models were available in the 1890 catalog. All models were offered for $20 except Cyprus, which was priced at $37.50. This is a drawing of Joseph Eastman's patented tandem wind feature and shows it was patented June 15, 1886, patent number 343629. It should be noted that a second patent, 343947, was issued showing Abraham Craig as co-inventor. This patent was necessary to show that the tandem wind movement could be wound from the front or the back. This was necessary to make the movement usable in other styles clocks made by Boston Clock Company. A common rumor is that Boston Clock Company had a large inventory of porcelain faces with a single winding hole for use in time-only clocks they produced, and Eastman invented this tandem wind feature to accommodate these dials so that these faces could be used in striking clocks. Of course, Cyprus carriage clock winds from the back and would play no part in this rumor. Rumor also has it that the Boston Clock Company wished to sell clocks to Tiffany & Company and was turned down because none of their clocks were chiming or striking clocks, which were popular at the time. But these are only rumors. This patented feature was used on the Cyprus model carriage clock and several other styles of clocks made by the Boston Clock Company. The company produced approximately 14,000 clocks with the tandem wind movement. After the failure of the Boston Clock Company, Joseph Eastman incorporated the Eastman Clock Company on March 13, 1894 in Roxbury. He's listed as the president, and Charles D. Wainwright and Harry W. Pigeon are listed as director. The address given on the incorporation papers is 64 Warren Street, Roxbury, a suburb of Boston. The company was first listed in the 1895 Boston Business Directory. The company produced a few clocks and possibly some carriage clocks. However, carriage clocks have been found marked Eastman Clock Company. The known clocks produced by the Eastman Clock Company during this period were probably made from incomplete movements in cases he salvaged from the failed original Boston Clock Company. He was approached in August 1895 by the Chelsea Trade Association and citizens of Chelsea to build a new factory in Chelsea, which would employ about 30 to 40 workmen, according to the mayor's annual report of January 20, 1896. The almost completed Eastman Clock Company building ran into financial difficulties in May 1896, which resulted in a bank foreclosure on October 29, 1896. It has now been discovered that the Eastman Clock Company did produce some regulators, banjos, and marine clocks at this factory prior to the foreclosure. The building in this picture was built by Joseph Eastman to house the Eastman Clock Company, which later became the home of the Chelsea Clock Company. An investor group headed by H.W. Bates founded a second Boston Clock Company and incorporated it in Kittery, Maine on October the 7th, 1896. They adopted the name Boston Clock Company, hoping to capitalize on the original Boston Clock Company's reputation for making high-quality clocks. For many years, it was believed this was a shell company and did not produce any clocks at the newly acquired factory at 284 Everett Avenue in Chelsea, which was formerly the Eastman Clock Company. It has now come to light that some clocks were made in the 7-month period before the name changed to the Chelsea Clock Company. The name change was due to Charles H. Pearson taking control of the company. However, these clocks were renamed and sold under the name Chelsea Clock Company. The clocks produced by the second Boston Clock Company was possibly due to the court awarding Peter H. Kroll the entire contents of the Eastman Clock Company factory. And this was for construction and labor and material liens. The rights to the contents were then purchased by H.W. Bates, who had previously bought the building from the bank at foreclosure. Now Bates had a complete working factory. This slide shows a clock with the original name circular milled off the back plate and renamed Chelsea. This clock was later sold to the Jordan Marsh Company in Boston on August 25, 1899. The movement in the case of this early Chelsea carriage clock is similar to a Fairhaven manufactured clock. Only a few of these clocks exist today. Chelsea began numbering carriage clocks movements at 2799, indicating this clock was the 56th clock produced. The Chelsea sales ledger describes this clock as clock number 1, 2799 was marked as a sample and was kept by Charles Pearson. The Chelsea Clock Company later made two different models of carriage clocks, number 187 and 188. Both were circa 1900 through 1927. Both were offered in the 1906 Chelsea catalog. Variations of these clocks were sold as late as 1927. These clocks are referred to as Series D in the Chelsea Clock Company historical records. It should be noted that Joseph Eastman didn't own any part of or work for the Second Boston Clock Company or the Chelsea Clock Company. There is no known association between Joseph Eastman and H.W. Bates or Charles H. Pearson. Further proof of this fact is the very short time between the foreclosure of the Eastman factory in Chelsea, Massachusetts on October 29, 1896, and the merger of Joseph Eastman with Nahum J. Busby, a partner of the Busby Bell and Tool Company. Together they formed the Fairhaven Manufacturing Company in Fairhaven, Vermont, in December 1896. This was reported in the Jeweler's Circular and Horological Review in their December 16, 1896 publication. This was less than 2 months separating the two events. Joseph Eastman was not a man easily discouraged by previous failures in the manufacturing business. Busby moved his Bell factory to Fairhaven, Vermont, where he and other investors incorporated the Busby Bell and Tool Company in Vermont on April 28, 1896. On February 15, 1898, the Busby Bell and Tool Company name was changed to the Vermont Clock Company. It is speculated the name change was to give the company a name better associated with clockmaking rather than bells and tools. No clocks have been found marked Busby Bell and Tool Company. Fairhaven Manufacturing Company never filed for incorporation in the state of Vermont. Apparently, it operated as a partnership between Eastman and Busby until the Busby Bell and Tool Company name change. Although there are no official Vermont state records, we know that the Fairhaven Manufacturing Clock Company did exist, as we have clocks that are marked Fairhaven Manufacturing Company. It is possible Eastman brought parts and design from his previous companies, as Busby was not a clockmaker. Busby is listed as an inventor in the 1897 Boston City Directory. The Vermont Clock Company existed only from 1898 to 1902 and published its only catalog in 1900, which offered carriage clocks model number 1 and model number 2, similar to the Boston carriage clocks, although the movements had fewer parts in their design, and they are still high-quality carriage clocks. The introductory page of the Vermont Company catalog speaks of the high quality of clocks made by the Boston Clock Company and states that due to the new designs and manufacturing processes, Vermont Clock Company offers the same quality at a much lower price. The catalog offered 4 crystal regulators, 2 carriage clocks, a ship's bell clock, and several other wall and shelf clocks, and even a 15-foot tall street clock. Under the name Fairhaven Manufacturing Company and Vermont Clock Company, they made about 3,000 clocks. The Vermont Clock Company ended all manufacturing in 1902. This was the last company associated with Joseph Eastman to manufacture a carriage clock, but not the last clock company he would found. From Fairhaven back to Boston, Joseph Eastman would try again. After the closing of the Vermont Clock Company in 1902, and in 1904 he was joined by Henry C. Little to form Little and Eastman Company. This was his 4th clock-making venture. It is known the company was located at 595 Harrison Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, and they produced banjo clocks, regulator clocks, and possibly others. Movements in these clocks are marked Little and Eastman Company, Boston. All known examples of these clocks are dated between 1904 and 1907. Clocks made by this company are very rare. Dairy Manufacturing Company, 1908-1909, was Joseph Henry Eastman's fifth venture into the clock manufacturing business. Apparently, Eastman's capital had been exhausted by his previous failures, and he would serve this company as the production supervisor. Dairy Manufacturing Company was incorporated in Kittery, Maine on April the 8th, 1908, but its only manufacturing facility was Derry, New Hampshire. The clock movements and cases marked Dairy Manufacturing Company, Derry, New Hampshire, are so similar to those of the Little and Eastman Company, it is obvious that there was a connection between the two companies. Dairy Manufacturing Company published a catalog picturing many high-quality clocks. Some of these clocks are known to exist today in private collections. Dairy Manufacturing Company ceased doing business in 1909. Their charter was revoked in 1911 as they did not pay their annual filing fee. The manufacturing assets of the company were sold to the Frank Hershey Company of Cincinnati, Ohio in 1912. It is not known what Joseph Eastman did in the years between the closing of the Dairy Manufacturing Company in 1909 and the incorporation of the new second Eastman Clock Company in 1915. We do know he was still living in Boston. It is speculated that he could have privately contracted to complete clocks for Frank Hershey, who had purchased the assets and the machinery of the Dairy Manufacturing Company. We do know that the Hershey Company did sell clocks with movements made by the Dairy Manufacturing Company. At the age of 72 in 1915, Joseph Eastman would try again for the sixth time under the name Eastman Clock Company Incorporated. It was located at 564 Washington Street, Boston. In 1915, the last year, his home address was 38 Quincy, Roxbury, Massachusetts, where he and his family had lived for the previous 22 years. Did he have to sell his home to raise capital for this new venture? We don't know. In 1917, the company's business address changed to 8.5 Bosworth, and changed again in 1918 to 9 Boston Bosworth. The number of clocks produced by the Eastman Clock Company Incorporated is not known, but several banjo clocks produced during this period of time recently have been discovered, and movements were marked Eastman Clock Company Incorporated. Joseph Eastman took in a partner, William H. Osborne, in 1920 to form the E&O Clock Company at the same address as the second Eastman Clock Company Incorporated, 9 Bosworth, Boston. The Boston City Directory of 1920 shows William H. Osborne listed as an engraver. Then, in 1921, Boston City Directory lists him as a clockmaker. He is not listed in the 1922 Boston City Directory. Little is known about what type of clocks they made at this address, and I know of none in existence today. Do you know of any clocks with the E&O Clock Company markings? If so, I would appreciate hearing from you. After dissolving the partnership with William H. Osborne in the E&O Clock Company, he returned to the name Eastman Clock Company Incorporated and was still operating at the same address. It is known the company produced some banjo clocks during this period, but little else is known about the clocks he produced. The company was listed in the Boston City Directory business section for the last time in 1924. Joseph Henry Eastman was then 81 years old. He retired to Dedham, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, to live out his final years. He is listed in the 1925 Dedham, Massachusetts City Directory as a resident. Joseph Henry Eastman was not a quitter. He devoted most of his life to making high-quality carriage clocks. Among them were carriage clocks that equaled the quality and beauty of European carriage clocks of the time. He is reported to have invented one of the first electric clocks, but this has not been confirmed. Joseph H. Eastman's obituary states that in later 1900, he invented a process for making a blue-white light bulb known as a mercury vapor lamp, with a process for vaporizing mercury. He reportedly sold the idea and the process to Peter Cooper Hewitt for $500, but discovered too late that it was worth much, much more. We do not know if this story is true. However, we do know the mercury vapor lamp was patented by Mr. Cooper Hewitt on December the 3rd, 1901. Once again, we find that same old story, an inventor who had no head for business and was unable to capitalize on his creativity and patents. Joseph Henry Eastman died December the 17th, 1931, at the age of 88. His obituary was published in the Dedham Transcript, a Massachusetts newspaper, on January the 1st, 1932. He died almost penniless and is buried in Boston's Forest Hill Cemetery, Site 237, Section 24. His wife, Rosamond, and daughter, Elizabeth, are also buried there in a common grave with him. His complete obituary can be found at the Chelsea Clock Museum website. However, some of the statements made in his obituary cannot be verified. We, as collectors and horologists, owe this man a debt of gratitude for the fine clocks he helped to manufacture. I hope this presentation has enlightened you about the life of Joseph Henry Eastman and his contribution to American horology. Thank you. And now I'd like to make a plug for our new Carriage Clock, Chapter 195, which is an online chapter. And to join the Carriage Clock chapter, all you have to do is send us your name, address, email address, as it is an online chapter. And there is no dues for this. We have to have the email address, of course, to get you the newsletter. We do 4 newsletters a year, and they're very informative if you want to know more about carriage clocks, because that's what it's all about. So, Pat, I think it's time for me to turn it back to you. And we'll entertain questions at this time also. Hello?
Hello.
Pat, are you there?
Actually, this is Katie.
There you are.
Ken.
Okay, Katie. Sorry.
That's okay. If anyone has any questions, we'll give you a few moments to type those in. And while you do that, I am going to upload a file for everyone if you want to download. It's the article that Ken referenced at the beginning of his presentation. It'll be available for you in just a few minutes. It's the Bulletin article from, I think you said 2013, correct, Ken?
Yes. It's from number 406.
Yes.
Bulletin number 406.
So it should be available there. So if you didn't get a chance to read it in 2013 or want to review it now, you can go ahead and download that from your control panel, but we'll wait for people to ask any questions. All right, we have our first question from Steve. What's the email address for the online carriage clock chapter? Do you know, Ken, that they should send?
The email address, hold on just a minute, let me get that for you. Yeah. Just send it to me, Ken Hogwood at AOL.com, not case sensitive. And then, of course, what we do is we'll forward it on to our chapter secretary.
And Frank had that same
name,
question.
Yeah, name. Here again, all I need is name, NAWCC number, email address, and we'd like to have your street address too, if you don't mind. Now, our website to take the newsletters, you can go to nawcc.org, and it is linked there when you go into Carriage Clocks.
Okay, and we'll see if anyone has any other questions about the presentation. We'll give you another minute to type those in. Okay, Ken, next question was from John, and it's what was the maximum jewel count of the carriage clocks?
Of his carriage clocks, or all carriage clocks? I've got to have a little clarification there.
Okay, John, do you want to clarify your question for us? He said of Eastman's.
Okay, that would have been 11, and that was the premium clocks. 7 was the standard, 7 jewels, and 11 was the premiums. And then when you had an 11 jewel, back in the presentation, you saw like on the Fairhaven clock that had the beautifully engraved damascene nickel plates in the back, those would have all been 11 jewels.
Okay, next question from Rick. Are there any pictures of his banjo clocks?
Yes, there are pictures available, but not on our website. Go to the Chelsea Clock Museum, Joseph Henry Eastman section, and you'll find some of the other models of clocks, and I'm pretty sure there was some banjo clocks that was there.
And Rick has a follow-up question to that. Were they of the Willard or Howard style? Do you know?
Yes, they were of the Simon Willard version, the 1802 patent of Simon Willard. They were that style, and there were probably more than one sizes, because most of the clock manufacturers, when they were copying Simon Willard, they would produce it in a 3/4 size instead of the full size. That was very common. Here's another bit of information I'll read off to you. Butan just put this in front of me. The email address, if you want to go direct to the 195 email, it's carriageclocks@optusnet.com.au. That's Australia. That's an Australian email address. So did you get that one?
Yes.
Pat, did you get that? Or
yes.
Not
no.
.net.
.net. Yeah.
No, it's not .net.
Okay, you got a .net.
No, I haven't. It's .com.
.com.au.
.com.
It's OPTUSNET.
I want to go one more time. Carriage clocks at optusnet.com.au. That's a long one. But that gets you to Australia. And that you'd be talking to Stan Boyetts at that address.
And I'm sure that information is also available on our website under the chapter finder information too.
It is. Yes, it is. It's go to the back of your bulletin and it should be right there.
Okay, next
all the
question for
chapters are
you,
listed.
Could be
Ken.
newsletter.
Yes.
Are there any 11 jewel clocks surviving?
Oh yes, I have several.
Okay.
And they're beautiful clocks.
And a question from Darlene. How many known numbers of J.H. Eastmans are known to exist?
Just carriage clocks or all clocks?
And Darlene, can you clarify that for us? Carriage clocks.
Carriage clocks. Well, like I pointed out, that the movements were serial numbered. Movement only, not cases. And we know the existence of at least 4,900 carriage clocks, plus up to 600 Cyprus models. Um, my Cyprus model is serial numbered 55. Well, they started at 600, so mine was like 554th in the production.
Okay, and a follow-up question she has, did any one of them fetch high auction values for their uniqueness?
I need a, how do you define high auction value, I guess, because the normal, for the regular Boston clocks, the prices for those, the Cypress brings the most money in good condition. They'll bring up to $1,000. It depends on if it was the 11 jewel or not, and I'd say they vary from about $700 to $1,000. Okay, and then of course the more rare ones don't come up for auction, like the Fairhavens that's in my collection there. I've only seen two in my lifetime. I own one of them, and a good friend of mine owns the other one. So some of the, you can't put an auction value on them because they don't ever come up. And the same thing is Vermont Clock Company. They're a little more plentiful because there's about 3,000 of those made that said Vermont, of those two models. And I have one of each of those models. Here again, they rarely ever come up. But so it's really a hard thing to say, because they're so rare.
Okay.
But I would venture to say that anything you got to sell in those models, they'd go pretty quick once a carriage clock person knows they're available.
And Tom has a question. He says, I have a Bigelow, Kenyard and Company Boston carriage clock. Is there any connection to Mr. Eastman?
None. That's an easy one. No. I have seen that clock before. Now the Bigelow, I think the only Bigelow that I think I ever saw was a banjo clock, but Bigelow was a different maker.
Okay, and I think that's all of the questions we have. So,
Okay.
Ken, thank you again, and thank everyone for joining us this evening. We have recorded this presentation, and it will be available on our website for those of you that want to review it again. So thank
Okay. Let me plug one more thing here.
Sure.
If you have more questions about him and his life, please do read the Bulletin article, because this is just the tip of the iceberg of what I published about him in that article. And then if you're not satisfied with what you find there, or you still have questions, kenhogwood@aol.com. That's my email address, and I'll be happy to try to answer any other questions about Eastman and his clocks. And please do, if you have any of these clocks that we're looking for, please let us know. Even if you don't want to sell them, just let us know they exist and send us pictures so that we can get those clocks recorded, especially anything marked Harvard, especially the Harvards. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much,
All
Ken.
right.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay. Okay, thank you, and good night.